So, the Madrigals are the state. They're also potentially the church. And if you think about it even more, the Madrigals are everything.
Welcome to the Gifted Child Symposium podcast, where we put our useless English degrees to use. This week, the subject we're thinking about way too hard is Disney's Encanto.
Hi, I'm Felicia.
And I'm Eugene.
For those of you who don't know, Encanto is a Disney animated musical film from 2021. It features songs by Lin-Manuel Miranda, aka the man who is single-handedly providing work for every single Latinx actor at the moment.
Thank you, my people.
I'm so happy for you. So the rough outline for how this film came to be is basically sometime towards the end of 2016, Lin-Manuel Miranda and Disney were busy promoting Moana. And around that time, Jared Bush and Byron Howard, Encanto's directors, and Lin-Manuel Miranda had conversations around their shared experiences of having really large extended families, and they wanted to create a movie about the complexities of those experiences. And it was actually Lin-Manuel Miranda who suggested that Latin American music, in its vibrancy and diversity, would be best suited to capture those complexities and those dynamics. So Jared, Byron, and Lynn went on a research trip to Colombia, etc., etc. We now have Encanto. Importantly, Disney was hesitant to have so many characters and so many family members as like part of the main cast. But Lin-Manuel Miranda, like spitefully, I guess, wrote the opening number, the Family Madrigal, to prove to Disney that it was possible to introduce loads of characters at the same time.
Yeah, you can tell he's a playwright. He's like, opening
number, introductory number.
Yeah, this is the story. This is where we're at.
I think what's most important about this fact is that basically the music came before the screenplay. Like, like they didn't have a plot before Lin-Manuel Miranda started writing the music. Which is why we have bangers, like we don't talk about Bruno, but the plot and the world building of Encanto leaves something to be desired for.
Yeah, and it was like revisited a lot. I remember, so I'm Colombian, and I visited some of the towns that inspired Encanto, and there's a lot of lore about how much research they did on the culture, how they wanted to be authentic, which is they had a lot of cultural consultants, which is why I think one of them ended up becoming like a co-director because of how much she contributed, Charisse Castro Smith, because how much she contributed to the story. Lynn is also credited as a screenwriter or a story because he just again wrote the music and they wrote it around it. So there's been just so many layers of changes. It originally was going to be like a girl and her grandpa instead of her grandma. So there's been a lot of changes, and yet this film makes no sense. And this is why we're here.
It really falls apart as soon as you even put like the slightest amount of like brain into it. Like it just truly doesn't make sense from start to finish.
Yeah, and starting with like the temporality of it. So like we are here like concerned with like locating Encanto. That's like what we're doing in this episode. So first of all, the like when Encanto is set is like nonsense and very confusing.
Yeah, so like we know where it is. It's in Colombia. Thank you so much for Carlos Vivas. And we have like a rough sort of, historical event that the plot is sort of based on, which Majin will go into in a second. But basically, we have not been able to stop thinking about this movie since we watched it in the cinema. And the thing that triggered my obsession with when Encanto is set is when I realized that it's set in this like sort of pre-modern technology world. But Bruno knows what telenovelas are, and that makes no sense. So when is it?
Yeah, which is like such a throwaway line, and I think it's just like a little nod to Latino culture. But it destroys everything, and it started this like fucking wormhole. But anyway, so I can tell you that most people who are smarter than me and know more than me locate this film in like around La Guerra de los Mil Días, or the Thousand Days War, which is a very important conflict in Colombian history that, as the name suggests, like lasted 1,000 days, and it was between 1899 and 1902. So the conflict was a war between the two factions of Colombia's government, like the two main political parties, the conservatives and the liberals, who were like fighting at the time over like what they wanted the country to be like after the conservatives took control over the government, like won the election. So they were both really dissatisfied with the state of the government, and a huge battle ensued. It is known as like one of the bloodiest, if not the bloodiest, conflict in Colombian history, and one of the worst wars, especially with like the magnitude and casualties. There was a lot of like informal warfare, guerrillas, which is now like the kind of like MO of a lot of the wars fought in Colombia. And a lot of the people fighting in both sides were forcefully recruited children and teenagers. It resulted in about 100,000 deaths, it is estimated. And throughout the 3 years, a lot of towns were targeted because of like just as an act of terror, or because the towns were like, supporting each side of the war. They were targeted, ransacked, destroyed, and forcing its residents to flee. So all of that aligns with like Abuela's flashback of, her, like the violence, the fact that the people were on horses that were like lighting on fire the towns, and the fact that the entire town, including Abuela, her 3 children, and her husband Pedro, had to flee the town, and then, therefore creating Encanto. So I also read that a lot of people believe that it could be possible for this conflict to also be La Violencia, which is another conflict in Colombian history that also was between liberals and conservatives. But this happened in 1948 to 1958, which is a bit too late because of the dress, like the traditional dress that everyone in Encanto wears. That kind of signals, like 19th, 20th century, which in the flashback was like 40, 50 years ago. So the one huge piece of, evidence, hard evidence we have of locating Encanto is one little character's waistcoat. His dad. Agustin, my love, he is like the one concerning piece of evidence that helps us locate Encanto temporarily.
Temporally.
Thank you. Also temporarily, because after this, Lamau. So like he is said to be like a city boy, and he dresses completely different than everyone. So he has like a modern waistcoat, like a little tie, and that like really contrasts with like everyone's typical dress.
Yeah.
So the suit appears to be from like the 40s. It's very classic. It could be like worn right now, but it looks like it's a kind of like a typical wear from the 40s, which would make sense since, if the war wasn't like 1902, like pre-1902, and it's been around 40 years since Abuela had to flee and Encanto, like the town in Encanto was created, then it would make sense with Agustin, being from the 1940s, or like our 1940s, entering the universe of Encanto.
Yeah. But that brings us back to the question of, where is Casita? Like, if this man from the 1940s, like clearly 1940s modern dress, not magical, from just another city, that implies that there is like a universe outside of the Encanto. Like the Encanto is not just like this like magical like bubble. It exists somewhere. Where? And how did Agustin come here?
Yeah, how I don't think we're going to answer this question, by the way. This is just a question to whoever's listening. How did he get in? Anyway, this small detail of Agustin's presence is very out of place with the plot, with the environment, with Encanto, with the Encanto universe, and it kind of starts signaling at the cracks of the plot of the film, which is honestly like the plot is as full of cracks and delicate as Casita.
Yeah.
So yeah. if we're talking about the plot, we gotta, think about Encanto. But before that, we've started mentioning, Mirabel, Agustin. There's so many characters, and we are sadly not Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I'm just gonna remind us super quickly about who everyone is.
Grandkid Roundup.
Grandkid Roundup. So yeah, like kind of going down the line, we have Abuela Alma and Abuelo Pedro. Iconic. One of them very dead from the beginning. Abuelo Pedro, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so Abuela Alma, who's the matriarch, she had three children. I'm pretty sure they were triplets. So yeah, the three little bebés grew up to become Pepa, who controls the weather, Julieta, who's Mirabel, the protagonist's mom, and she heals with food, and Bruno, who is iconic and gay, in my opinion, and sees the future. And then we have many, many grandkids and Peppa's children.
Can I interject? You didn't mention something very important.
Yeah, sorry.
Peppa controls the weather with her emotions.
Sorry, yeah. She doesn't control the weather logically. Like, hikey other characters just kind of have powers that they use effectively. This bitch doesn't, right? Like, she just kind of, like, smiles and it's sunny.
Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be important later.
Yes, so controls the weather, but her emotions control the weather. So her children are kind of irrelevant to both the plot and the argument. But I guess Dolores is like iconic, and she's the town gossip, and her power is that she can hear everything. And the important grandchildren are the protagonist, Mirabel, who has no gift. Luisa, who is super strong. Her and Isabella, who grows flowers, and other vegetation, and they are Julieta and Agustin's children.
Yeah, so we've been introduced to this cast of characters. All of them have fantastical powers, each more strange than the last. And throughout the Family Madrigal, the opening number, and like through the introduction to the film, we learn that they all fulfill like various duties throughout the town. Like Luisa, with her super strength, will like move a church or whatever it is that happens. She like saves lost sheep or whatever.
Donkeys.
Donkeys, thank you.
But yeah, like the gifts are like very, some of them are incredibly useful and some of them are gags.
Yeah, like Peppa is never seen to use her gifts for anything useful, but she does a pretty powerful gift, like controlling the weather. Whether or not it's voluntary is still like pretty significant. But those who do have useful gifts, so specifically Luisa and Julieta, who can heal people with her food, she seems to feed the town / heal the town. I'm not really sure. Like she was just seen handing out arepa con quesos in the beginning of the film. But they are like the center around which this town seems to revolve, which begs the question, what even is this town's like societal structure? Like, are the Madrigals like the ruling family? Like, are they the ruling class? Is Abuela like the dictator, or is she just like the gentle village leader? Unclear, right? Like, it seems that the town is completely reliant on the services of these magical people, and they also have the biggest house, which is magical. And importantly, because we're discussing a Disney movie, is Mirabel a princess? She's the closest thing that we have. She's the closest thing this town has to royalty.
Yeah, like it makes sense. Like a lot of this Halloween and last, like kids have been dressing up as Mirabel, and I think she has joined the ranks of a princess, kind of in the same ways that like Mulan or Moana could be considered princesses, even though they're not royalty. But then it again signals to her power, both within like our culture and like in the story. She's the grandchild of like the most important family.
That's the thing, right? Like the power from this family it's a bloodline. It's like it's inherited. It's not elected at all.
Yeah, it's given like for as much as like the miracle at the start was like from Abuelo Pedro and sacrifice and blah blah blah. After that is just birth. Like after that they did nothing to earn this, but they have power.
Yeah.
And like Abuela always says like we owe it to the town, but how, like, because yeah, they're privileged to have these gifts, but how much do the town owe them? Like, the town is so intimately involved in the Madrigal shit. Even though, who are the townspeople? So, like, when I was researching, there's a little bit of scholarship on Encanto. Thank you so much to the, like, 4 people who've written about this. So grateful, because here we are. So I found this round table from the Toynbee Foundation Prize called In the Land of Forgetfulness, History, Memory, and Culture in Disney's Encanto. My brain trying to be like, it's not Disney, it's Disney. But it's not Encanto, but Encanto. Like, I'm gonna be saying Disney by the end of this. Anyway,
Disney.
Disney. So to quote Mariana Diaz Chalela from Yale University, the movie recreates a rural town that could be seemingly set in the 1950s as much as it could be set in the 1980s. The Madrigals are the large landowners that feel a sense of duty to the community, somewhat evocating large terratenientes. Yet the community is made up of a lineup of unnamed characters, apart from Mariano's family, the man set to marry into the Madrigal family. We don't actually get to know much about the life of the town, besides the fact that the Madrigals help out with the town activities. And yet the movie drives the point that it is the sense of community, presumably ascribed to rural life, that rebuilds the Madrigals' home. End quote. So yeah, like Diaz Chalela is so right at pointing out all of these things about the themes and inconsistencies. Like, the film is about community, and yet who are these people?
Who are these people?
Yeah, like, we don't really understand who anyone is. The only person who has like a name is Mariano, and Mariano's like mom, and that's because they're like, he's relevant to the plot. And there is like a sense of duty coming from both the town towards the Madrigals and the Madrigals to the town. And like, I don't know, there's just like this like intimate involvement. Like, the town is there for Mariano's and what's her name, Isabella's almost proposal. They are there for the ceremony of Antonio, which when I was like rewatching Encanto, I was like, is this like a cute little party? Like, they like frame it as like a cute little party, like, oh, we're gonna celebrate Antonio getting a gift. Antonio's the little child who can talk to animals. But I like, it's also like, are they just waiting to see like if Antonio's gift is gonna be useful to them, or are they like, do they all have to attend, as in like peasants attending a king's or like a monarch's coronation? You know, like,
yeah, no, I can.
This is willing.
I can only assume that when the town came to, what's his name's 7-foot frame, what's his name who sings that line? Camilo.
No, irrelevant town shapeshifter, yes.
Yeah, the Camilo. I can only assume that when he had his like gift ceremony or candle, I don't know what they call it, that they all collectively groaned when they found out that his talent was shapeshifting, because that is utterly useless to them. Whereas like everyone else is like, oh, we can find some use for that. Camilo. Cool.
Yes. Again, like, what is the relationship between the town and the people? Like, are the people like waiting to see how the Madrigals are going to be useful, or are the people just like, oh, they are like our kings and queens, we gotta go?
Nothing better to do. They took our employment.
Yeah, and like about this kind of like responsibility relationship between the two factions, the ruling class or not, and the town. Like, I like you and I have been haunted by a line in the last song of the film where they're rebuilding the house after it's been destroyed. They're rebuilding Casita, where the entire town comes over and is like, we have no gifts, but we are many, and we'll do anything for you. And they're like, just like building the casita for them.
Like, literally. And it's like this weird, like, really desperate moment, right? And it's like why did they need to point out that it's like, you know, like they have no powers? They're just strong in numbers. Like, we're your workforce. Let us help you rebuild your kingdom at no cost to us.
We'll do anything for you. It's so stressful to me. I don't know.
Yeah. So is it out of desperation? Is it not? The most damning evidence, I think, for the fact that the townspeople are kind of reliant and sort of in servitude, let's say, of the Madrigals is Mariano's entire plot, lack of personality, place in the film. Because his deal is that he's like courting, I guess, Isabella. And also, we should mention that he's the only character outside of the Madrigals who's given a name and a bit of interiority. Like, he kind of has a personality in that. Does he? I don't know. Like,
he's hot.
He's hot. He's polite. He's the perfect son-in-law. That's his.
He's played by Maluma, baby.
He has like bimbo vibes. Himbo vibes is what I should say. But yeah, like his plot is that he's set to marry Isabella, and then the moment Isabella is like, I'm, my powers can grow. Wow, I'm so free. I'm so independent. Look at me swing on a vine. Dolores is like, hi, and he's like, hi, immediately. So he really, really wants to marry into the family, is what we can gather from this, because he's not given any indication for like actually being madly in love with either of them. He's just a guy looking for accommodation
and power. And I don't know, besides him being hot, like, why is this such an important marriage? Because like in the bit right before Isabella's song, she's like, I'm doing it for the family. Like, I'm not a perfect person. This is not a perfect marriage. I'm doing it for the family. Why is she doing it for the family? Like, is Mariano like hot? Like, is Mariano the son of someone else? Like, I think it's like a weird dynamic where Mariano is definitely trying to marry into the family, but also like this family also needs the daughters to be married into so they can have like, I don't know, magical babies.
Yeah. And he wants 5 babies, as Dolores has heard him say.
Yeah. And it's like, because he's like a Colombian man who wants a big family, or because he wants like a big magical lineage.
Unclear.
But yeah, he really just wants to marry into this family, which means that would probably be, if this is some sort of advantageous marriage in both cases, it probably means that he is hot from a good family, but he's gonna jump to another social class when he marries him into the Madrigals. Like, I guess everyone wants that.
And like, who wouldn't? You know?
Yeah.
Another thing though, wait, hang on. Have we considered this? No, we have considered this, but let's mention it anyway. But when outsiders marry into the Madrigal family, do they just like live in the weird ass rooms that magical kids get given?
Like, imagine Antonio grows up and brings a girl into his jungle. What if she doesn't love like birds?
Like, literally. And it's like, if Bruno, bless him, gay little soul, wants to bring a man home, do they fuck in the sand?
Yeah, because Casita is a strange thing. Like, the fact that you only have a new room if you get a gift, which is proven by the fact that Mirabel only has the nursery. Like, she just lives in the nursery. Like, Casita was like, fuck you. You don't get a gift, you don't get a room. So if Casita isn't even willing to do that for an actual member of the Madrigal family because she doesn't have a gift, I don't think she's doing that for newlyweds.
Nah. Mariano's gonna be sleeping in Dolores' room, which is a whole other issue. What is her room like? Is it soundproof or is it a giant ear? It's one of the two.
Anyway, is it just a recording studio? Like, who knows? But yeah, I guess that is the deal. That's what happens when you marry into the most powerful family. You live in whatever room you get.
Maybe that's why he wanted to marry Isabella, because he's like, oh yeah, flowers, I can deal with that.
Yeah, no, she has a lovely room. And like, then I have to like, if we're talking about like Mariano marrying into the family because they are the equivalent of royalty, then I have another thing to bring up, which is, are they not only the equivalent of royalty, could they also be considered the equivalent of gods?
Yes, I think so.
Because like, okay, so like the whole, if we're talking about like the organization of the government, like the government, the politics, the society organization of Encanto, like it is Latin America's Colombia. There are churches, like very explicitly, Pepa's wedding is in a church. What's her name? Luisa, as you said, like changes a church to one place to another. I don't know why. And there's like
literally moves a church.
Yeah, I don't know why.
No idea why.
And there's a priest, like a Catholic priest, in the like standing on the front.
It's coming on my hair will disappear. Now look at my head.
Oh yeah, like so like there is like there's a priest, there's masses, there's ceremonies in the church. Like there's the concept and also the practice of religion, specifically like a Catholic religion, probably because Colombia is a Catholic country. So like how do we deal with those two things? Like that was one of the things that like sent us into this little like I remember when we were talking about this initially a year ago, I was like, I know my people. Like they like how are Colombians negotiating a life of magic, like true magic, and Catholicism, like where anything beyond God is a sin. So like how can both God and the Madrigals exist? That means they're like, are they satanic, or because everyone in the town loves them, are they God sent? Like are they like given like this miracle? Like the word miracle is not only like has the connotation of like, oh, you know, like it's a wondrous thing, has a religious connotation, like the miracles.
It's a candle. Let's discuss the significance of the candle.
Yeah, like, and the candle situation comes from like Dia las Velitas, like the tradition of the 7th of December, but it also just comes from like a wider understanding of like, you know, my grandma, whenever she wants to, you know, wish luck on anyone, she like lights up a big veladora candle. So like it is all of these symbols relate to Catholicism. So are they gods or like God sent? And like how does that like transfer to like the whole like divine right or rule? Because they have God-given gifts and miracles that gives them authority. Are they gods? Are they the rulers? Like it's kind of fucking insane.
So the Madrigals are the state. They're also potentially the church. And if you think about it even more, the Madrigals are everything, surely, because they're in a rural village. Like they're far away, probably, who knows, but probably far away from other civilization. They probably don't engage in international trade.
Like regional trade.
Like trade.
Trade in general. Except for Agustin.
Not local men. Men from outside of a 5-kilometer radius.
Inbreeding in the Encanto universe will probably become a concern in a few years. I know it's only the family. I know it's a town, but in a few years, you know?
Oh, maybe they went and got Agustin because he was like, they were like, guys, we can't, this is not sustainable. We have to bring in some new blood.
Yeah, we can't do a cousin again.
Maybe they found him and brought him to the Encanto.
Is Agustin kidnapped part 2? Like, follow for part 2 of this episode.
Yeah, no, but like a town has needs. And when you're closed off, allegedly, like the Encanto is, like Casita, I don't know if I know what to call this.
Yeah, the town, the Encanto,
I don't know. You know, where, so is Julieta the entire healthcare system? Can she cure, you know, we know she can cure a cut, but can she cure cancer?
We don't see doctors at all.
Yeah, so like, I mean, there's no limit, right? Like, we don't know, but allegedly she can heal minor injuries at least. So presumably she can probably heal other things. And I think importantly to ask, because we've got Peppa suffering, I think. I'm not really sure. She seems a bit stressed. Can she cure mental illness? Does her power reach that far? Also, the other question is, what on earth is the demand on the healthcare system in this town? Because, like, shit happens, you know? And if she's the only provider of healthcare, like, how long is her line? Like, how many arepa con quesos does she have to make every day?
Yeah, like, what is flu season like? It's just Julieta, like, slaving away in the kitchen?
Just like, fuck, another masa.
And we could, like, ask even more questions. Like, I would love to dive deep into, like, is it always arepa con queso? Or, like, if she spends, you know, if she ferments something, will that...
Oh, yeah.
Is the recipe... Is it cure depending on the recipe? Or is it just, like, a magical, like, almost like a chemotherapy thing where, like, the magic just enters the body and targets whatever? Or everything until it cures it?
And my other question is, at what point would the food have to be affected by Julieta to, like, take the healing properties, right? Like, if she just hands me about an apple, surely nothing happens, right? Because, like, she hasn't cooked it.
Does she have to be part of everything? Because, like, masa, the way I make an arepa, will come pre-made. Like,
interesting.
Does she
have to pick
grind
the corn?
Yeah, does she have to grind the corn, pick it up? Honestly, There's might be a reason why we don't see her a lot in the film. Obviously not because the writing is questionable. It's because she's probably busy. Like, she's probably doing a lot for the town.
Yeah. And like Luisa, she has a whole song about it. She's doing so much all the time, every day.
She, like, talking about Luisa, she might be like the sole, not only like construction worker, like maintains a town, moves donkeys. I don't know why no one is minding donkeys, but like she puts like a bridge on a river. Like, is she just the architect, builder, like the entire infrastructure of the town?
She literally rerouted a river, I think.
Oh my god, yeah. Oh, does she change it? Yeah, does she change it depending on like crops?
Yeah. Is she the irrigation system?
Yeah, she's everything.
Speaking of irrigation, Peppa, the biggest anomaly when it comes to her powers, because she has literally no control over them, apparently. Please explain this theory that you've read about.
Yeah, so like when we're talking about like, if we're talking about like irrigation and agriculture and stuff like that, like I was just reading like shit that people have talked about on Twitter about Encanto, and there was like this theory that because Peppa's mood affects the weather, and she obviously seems to be having an episode every 3 minutes, and she seems to be like very, sensitive. There's like, if you see like the sisters, like Mirabel, Luisa, and Isabella, like they're all kind of like around the same age, like maybe 1 or 2 years in between them. But like Peppa's children, one of them is like a full adult, probably like mid-20s. The other one's a teenager, and the other one's like 8. So there was this theory that was like, is it because she goes so insane when she's pregnant that she just creates like natural disasters and like droughts, like she's the niña and el niño at the same time every time she's pregnant because of her like changing hormones, that the town had to regulate her birth to like save their lives, to like, they could only phase one of Peppa's pregnancies every like 5 to 8 years, which is hilarious.
I think this is a really, really, really strong theory, because there's no reason why all of her kids are so far apart in age, especially considering the precedent. Like, her parents were triplets, ?
She's a triplet. Yeah, she's part of a triplet.
Oh yeah, she's a triplet. Yeah. And like, her sister had 3 kids all in a row. So the question is, can weather exist outside of Peppa's mood? Like, can weather just regulate itself the way it does like in real life? Or does she need to be sad for there to be rain? Like, do they have to make her sad for like a few months at a time? So there's like growth. There's like so they can like water things, Yeah,
it's really, really stressful, because again, if you kind of like listen to this theory, what's really sinister is the idea of like controlling her birth. And then you get into like controlling her emotions. Like, she would just be a machine to serve the town.
Yeah.
Needed to be happy 6 months of the year, needed to be, sad during like to control crops that were like not perennial. It's so stressful, and again, the movie never addresses it, because she just kind of like has like a little cloud on top of her, but also if she gets really upset, the entire town has a hurricane.
Married in a hurricane.
So she obviously she has a lot of power, even though she cannot control it, and she could make or break the year's crops. Yeah, if there's no trade, she could make or break. Like, she could starve the entire town.
She really could. But there's a trump card maybe, because unstoppable force meets immovable object. Isabella can grow things. She makes flowers grow mostly. But is her power limited to flowers? Probably not, right? Like, she grows like trees and cacti or whatever. So it's probably not like a botanical limitation to just flowering plants. The question is, can she grow crops? Like, can she grow wheat and corn? So is she single-handedly sustaining the town with her crops?
I guess she could, like, to the point of the film where she's just decorating it. She's useless. But she also seems to know a lot about plants, because that's her gift. So, like, Hurricane of Jacarandas, I assume she could potentially know enough about potatoes and just grow them in, like, where they're meant to be grown. And she could be the future of the town. again, insane. Where do they get the food? Is it infinite? And is it Isabella is a huge question, because then she is the economy. She is the demand and the supply. Like,
yeah, because like Isabella's powers don't seem to be contingent on any sort of like fertilization process. Like she is the fertilization, so surely she can't like over farm land. You know, like she can't like deplete the resources of the land itself. So it's like infinite.
that is so true.
But speaking of food, I also had this thought about the child, Antonio, who can speak to animals. I know he's 8 in the movie or whatever, but eventually, will he control livestock?
First of all, the fact that this is Colombia and there isn't livestock stresses me out. But there probably is. There's like chickens and pork and stuff. They're eating like ajiaco, which has chicken.
Yeah,
So,
they
like,
have cheese for the arepa con queso, so
true.
they clearly have
You need
cows.
livestock. Where is it at? And is poor Antonio gonna?
Like, so like his power isn't controlling animals, but he can like
just hears
understand
them.
and he can talk to them. So is this man, this child, going to be so? I can only assume he's going to be so traumatized when he grows up that he will go vegetarian. Like, there's no way. Like, I mean, like, unless they're like, you know, forcing him to like coerce the animals to come to the slaughterhouse. Like, come here, cows, my friend, my lifelong friend. Come here to be my tasty meal. Like, no, I think he's gonna wanna, you know, he's gonna work for PETA.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's gonna be the one activist, being like, what does he say in the film? He's like, oh, the rats told me everything or whatever. He's gonna be like, the cows told me everything.
And like the nicer version of it is that maybe he'll like, I don't know, help in conservation efforts in Colombia. But let's be real. Luisa has to move churches, so I mean,
yeah, he's gonna really convince some cows to go to their deaths for the yearly asado.
We've covered a lot of things that a town may need, but a lot of services, a lot of essential goods and services seem to have been covered by the Madrigals. So is there money? Do you think there's a currency?
I assume there isn't. I don't know, there should be, right? Like, if not, this is the most incredible socialist utopia, which we shall talk about later. And again, if they are the ruling class because of this privilege, as you said, and great responsibility, then I was just saying the other day, is Dolores the justice system? Because she hears everything. Like, she has, like, the justice system, not even, like, she doesn't have to be a judge. She could literally just be like, she is the he said, she said.
It's she said in this town.
I don't know to what extent she understands this responsibility, because she doesn't tell anyone about Bruno, which is hilarious.
No. I mean, she's a huge gossip, I think. I think she would wield that information. She could blackmail people. Like, why doesn't she tell anyone about Bruno? Like, why? Like, does she hate Bruno? Like, did she want revenge on him for some reason? Because he told her that the man of her dreams would be just out of reach, but chose another? Like, is she super upset?
Yeah, and like, I don't know, like the fact that she doesn't right any of these wrongs. Like, you know, she lets everyone say these things about Bruno, even though she knows they're not true. It kind of goes beyond, like, the whole thing of, like, abuela, peer pressuring, blah, 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 blah. And it is just kind of, like, this lack of responsibility that Dolores has. I know she's a gossip, but, like, if she was faced with, like, an actual dilemma, an actual crime, an actual fight, will she tell the truth that she has a terrible precedent of not doing it?
So many good questions, but also Dolores seems mildly insane.
Yeah.
Like, you know, she's like literally hearing voices, and she's like really twitchy, and she can hear a pin drop from a mile away, which doesn't sound very healthy, which is why I think for her sake that her room should be like a soundproof box, so she can have quiet for once in her life. But like it also, like, you know, like her gift is probably the most prominent example of their gifts actually being like huge curses. Like, either they drive you insane, which is like Pepa and Dolores, or they make you like a literal like town pack donkey like Luisa. Do you like like growing up in that environment of watching your various family members have their own like crises, specifically because of their gifts, I bet that the Madrigals, when they're growing up, pray for a useless gift.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I love what you said. Like, I think there's a lot of this language that we're using that we're kind of hinting at this idea of like a miracle and a gift. And if you think about it for 4 seconds, it might be a curse and a huge responsibility. And I guess the film deals with that in like family dynamics, like what you owe to your family. Like that's lovely and that's like explored. It really does not dwell on what you owe to the people of the town.
No, not at all.
So yeah, it's been a bit insane now. Now that we've like discussed all the things they couldn't do, don't owe to the society, you know, I think like we should like, you know, step away.
Yeah.
And we've tried to focus, even though this is the opposite of focus. We've tried to focus on the society of Encanto. But you know, it's endless, and I think the only way to get out of it is to kind of step back and look at it from like what we say we are doing, which is like an academic perspective, and like, or any perspective, which is like, to me, it's like, you know, start by saying that like Encanto isn't meant to make sense, because like it's a kid's film, it's a Disney film, and they're like, you know, meant to not be this specific. They're meant to, you know, like they rely on some sort of fantasy and lack of specificity. Like, so they need to be situated in a world outside our own.
Yeah. I mean, so basically there's this like mode of study in medieval studies that's called contemporary medievalism.
Oh, by the way, so Felicia is a great academic, and she did a master's in early modern studies, so she will be bringing in all of this context with, you know, a degree on the back of it.
Listen, I have a degree in early modern studies, and I did a few modules on medieval studies, and specifically a module on contemporary medievalism. And I'm bringing all of that in today because it's a really interesting way of thinking about medieval movies. Movies set in the medieval period, not literal medieval movies. Basically, this mode of study, contemporary medievalism, is about basically how the medieval period, so the Middle Ages, the concept, not the actual historical period, is used in cinema and pop culture in general. And there's a pretty widely cited article by Arthur Lindley called A Historicism of Medieval Film, which refers to the Disneyfication of the Middle Ages. And this article is from 1998. So this like sort of mode of thinking has been around for a while, because the Middle Ages in pop culture has been pretty widely corrupted through Disney films particularly, but also just like in any sort of depiction of the Middle Ages. And why am I bringing this up? I know Encanto's not set in the frickin' Middle Ages, but I do think it's relevant in how this mode of study thinks about temporality in pop culture and in these sort of fantastical movies, because there's a general consensus amongst medievalists that the medieval period depicted in contemporary cinema is a simulacrum of the actual Middle Ages. There's a pretty well-known article as well by MJ Toswell that's called The Simulacrum of Neo-Medievalism. And it's basically just about how it's a copy of a copy of a copy based on nothing. And the time period is kind of like non-existent. And it's just kind of this aesthetic. There's a pretty well-known book chapter from Medieval Afterlives on popular culture by Kathleen Coyne Kelly called The Medieval Entertainment Channel, the Shrek Quartet. In which she writes that our continued experience of the Middle Ages is partial and contingent, making any representation of the Middle Ages epiphenomenal. Basically, Kathleen Coyne Kelly in this article says that there is no original Middle Ages depicted in cinema because it's all just like this sort of like imagined reality of the Middle Ages. Circling back to Encanto, I know it's not set in the Middle Ages, but what we can pull from this framework is that Encanto is also not really set in any particular time period, location. Like it has this aesthetic of early 20th century Colombia, but none of the sort of historical linearity or the consistency in like the world building at all. Encanto uses that simulacrum of a real period of time to allow its story and characters to have this non-specific quality in which you can kind of like project your, you know, fantastical ideals of society where everyone is good and everyone's merry. You can like suspend your disbelief and cynicism, but still feel like it has like some sort of, you know, cultural root, which I think is interesting when you consider the Colombian history it's based on.
Yeah, and like everything, like I think when we were both discussing this episode on Encanto in general, this isn't medievalism, but it is kind of like, you know, colonial dress and very atemporal. So it does become suspended in a pre-modernity. And I think it's like the atemporal thing is like really interesting because like while, you know, I spent some time locating Encanto and Abuela's flashbacks in the Thousand Days War. It could arguably be said in other times, even nowadays, because, you know, Colombian history has been so plagued with civil war, conflict, and especially civilian displacement. Colombia is actually has the largest population of internally displaced people in the world. It has around 6 to 8 million people that have been internally displaced and is only second to Syria in the amount of refugees in general. So this is just like a huge thing in Colombian history and Colombian society, beyond the clues of like the character's dress. Encanto could be set literally anytime, like even right now, because even after, you know, the peace treaty of 2016, there are still tens of thousands of people being forcefully displaced each year from their homes because of other conflicts and wars. So yeah, as in the roundtable I mentioned, Jorge González Jacome from Universidad de los Andes writes that Encanto can take place in Colombia, but also in any modern nation state that has suffered at different points of history the drama of violence, displacement, and reconstruction. So again, it could even be like, for as much as it is about Colombia, it could be anywhere in Latin America or anywhere in any place. And this is kind of the contemporary medieval quality that Felicia was discussing. And it's also present not only in the temporality, but also in the geography. Like the landscape and the vegetation kind of locates it kind of in the Eje Cafetero, or the coffee region of Colombia. You know, we have the palma de cera, or the palm trees and the lush mountains. And the town could be one of the towns in the Eje Cafetero, but it could also be one of the towns in the north. Like, it's just like a generic, but very pretty colonial town. And then you have the river in the kind of climax of the film where Abuela and Mirabel embrace. That is a copy of Caño Cristales, which is nowhere near the Eje Cafetero, or any of these colonial towns. So because it is like inspired in so many places, and it's kind of trying to compress all of Colombia's diversity and geography into a town that doesn't exist, it is kind of becomes outside of Colombia. It kind of just becomes its own thing, and it stops being in Colombia.
Yeah, because once you've like taken away the sort of temporal and spatial specificity of it, and also added this batshit political system, which doesn't match anything in any history, I don't think. Like, who the fuck? It very much is that weird, like, Disney feudal society where they all have very set roles and places in their community, but there's, like, no class disputes because it's a kid's film, so, like, well, you're not going to get into that. It's not really... There's no room. And that's, like, really a hallmark of, like, contemporary medievalism and these Disney films where they're, most of the time, are, like, princesses and kings and whatever. But they are almost always either intrinsically good-hearted or intrinsically evil. And there's no real need to prove either of these qualities in these rulers. Because, like, you know, the film isn't going to examine their ruling style too closely either. If the monarchy is good, then they're, you know, why would they hurt anyone? They're the good monarchy. Tyson Pugh, in the introduction to the Disney Middle Ages, A Fairy Tale and Fantasy Past. By the way, this chapter is titled Disney's Retro-Progressive Medievalisms, where yesterday is tomorrow today.
I love that. That's literally, Encanto. It is yesterday, tomorrow, and today.
Tyson Pugh writes that fairy tales look to a simpler and quote-unquote medieval-ish past to create a time of romance, adventure, and magic, and Disney's genius was to couple this nostalgia with a liberal dose of futurism, blending the two diametrically opposed temporalities into a seamless whole. So these characters that we grew up with, all these fairy tale princesses and princes and pirates and whatever, they all, and I quote again, inhabit a vaguely realized medieval world of desire, reflective of narrative and ideological continuity between yesteryear and tomorrow, someday that prince will come. So there's this optimism in Disney movies that help the audience overlook the gaping holes in the logic of them, because it's a fairy tale. It's going to have a happy ending. So the Madrigals provide everything that a society could possibly want or need through their powers, which sounds really utopian in theory. No one really has to work that hard to get the things that they need to survive. And in theory, it works really well. But in reality, when we've close examined it like this, when anyone looks at it too closely, it all falls apart really quickly. And let's think about the etymology of the word utopia. It literally means nowhere.
So yeah, all of this is super applicable. And as you said, utopia is nowhere. It's also no time. And I really loved what you just said about it being like optimistic, because it means it's kind of like not only, calling back into like a pre-modern tradition or like a simulacrum of it, it's also signaling a future that doesn't yet exist, which I think is kind of the key to Encanto's madness, and at least how it connects to the themes and the context, or the lack of the context, historical and cultural.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it is just like this rosy painting where all of her family trauma is healed because they now have a house again or whatever. And it's a shame, really, because I went into this movie being like, oh my God, so excited to see my best friend's culture depicted in a Disney film. I'm so happy for her. I'm so happy for Colombia and all Latin America. I was so excited to learn about it through Disney. And boy, I should have known better than to expect much of an education from Disney, because I really ended up seeing the most batshit movie set kind of nowhere in particular. But it was really cute seeing your food, and the body language was cute. But I ended up getting anyway was this lack of specificity, not only on time and place, but also culture. This culture that is not connected anymore to any contemporary history or society. A place that is completely rooted in the notion of placelessness. The center, it makes it so the center of the film is not really a representation of Colombian culture, but it's just this nonsense universe created as a result of the Disneyfication of Colombia.
There's a lot of specificity in the body language and the food, and that's why I was crying and having a panic attack watching it. I was really, really happy. But there's just a lot of dissatisfaction in feeling represented, because it is impossible to represent such a diverse country culture. And the lack of trying in a way is just kind of built into this Encanto's own destruction, because it had to be this kind of compression of everything. And being the first of its kind, it couldn't really be a specific story about a family that had been displaced because of this and blah, blah, and lived in this specific place. It had to kind of be removed from it, which is a shame. And I think why a lot of people are trying to locate Encanto so badly. But at the same time, if we kind of apply this optimism of contemporary medieval and the suspend your disbelief and the utopian side of Encanto, I just started sobbing in the Dos Oruguitas sequence, because it kind of made me think that no matter what conflict this was, it felt real. And I remember our friend who was our flatmate at the time, her family are refugees, and she started crying as well, because she identified with the plight of the Madrigals and being refugees. So kind of this lack of specificity can be kind of beneficial, because it can be relatable to a lot of people who have suffered the same thing. And in my case, it kind of got me thinking that Encanto really isn't about what Colombia is, but if examined under this contemporary medieval lens, it could be about what Colombian could be. The Madrigals don't have a government or a very strict hierarchical structure. Because I don't know, like maybe, if they come from the 1,000 Years War or La Violencia or whatever, having a strict government with two parties that have factions that fight and displace people and hundreds of thousands of casualties wasn't a good thing. It wasn't a good societal organization. So maybe that kind of answers a lot of the questions of like why the town works the way it does or doesn't work in a way we can comprehend it. It kind of like is kind of like a rejection of institutions that brought this particular family in this particular town a lot of heartache. And in a way, they kind of have their own independent republic that, without facing the massive violence or inflicting the massive violence that attempts of having an independent republic have had in Colombia. The people of the town and the Madrigals have a place to rebuild their lives, make their own rules, and decide what they want their society to be like. They have somewhere to heal and grow. So in a way, Encanto becomes a true utopia for a country whose history is full of violence and displacement. It is a story that, to me, speaks to people who were forced to flee their homes and kind of imagines a future where they actually find a home elsewhere, a safe haven. And I don't know, talking as a Colombian, Encanto's nonsense and fantasy can be hurtful for the representation, but can also be like just a real place of possibility, because it is a place that we could ever dream of going, a place for our extremely resilient country and its people, and a place that a lot of people are still fighting for. A sense of magical peace, I think, requires not being rooted in anything, so we can kind of dream of what we could become.
And it's like, we all want our cultures to be represented by Disney. Like, we all want that Halloween costume opportunity, And isn't it the Disney dream to have your culture represented as this magical place of wonder that you could have in Disneyland and no one would bat an eye? Like, no one wanted the Frozen movies to be about the savagery of Vikings or whatever else Norse culture is. And like, even Mulan is like a really sort of kid-friendly version of the actual war against the Huns. It's still also like very simplified, good versus evil. Let's not talk about the depiction of the Huns. That's very problematic. But, it's the Disneyfication of the world, the united world of Disney. And welcome, Colombia, to that sanitized version of yourself, which is really the dream that Lin-Manuel Miranda is setting out to fulfill on his career.
Yes, just wrapped into being. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, The Gifted Child Symposium. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on right now. It would really help us out. Also, please share us with your friends, family, and enemies. You can find us on Instagram at giftedcs.pod. We would love to hear from you.
So now that we know where Casita is, or where it isn't, I should say, let's talk about who is Casita.
As we mentioned, we have had many, just black holes, wormholes of thinking about this. And I started thinking about Casita and like who Casita is because of an iconic film that no one has watched except me. Like, Felicia hasn't seen it. It's not required for this argument. Called Monster House from 2006. The basis is haunted house, 3 kids, like, kind of want to discover what this house is. And this house is alive. Like, the stairs are the tongue and the windows are the eyes. Like, this house is alive and it's haunted. And it's, like, inside is, like, a very grumpy old man. And the 3 kids, like, enter the house. And eventually they find out the history of the house is that, like, the old man's wife died and was kind of buried in the foundation of the house. And her spirit has possessed the house. And that's why the house is, like, full of evil. And then at the end, she's kind of exorcised and she, like, I don't know, reunites with him. The point is, it's kind of like she's the house and that's why the house is alive and she needs to be let go for the house, for the resolution and the house to not be haunted anymore. And I was like, that's Casita. Like, it said that Abuelo Pedro dies and, like, in the foundations of his sacrifice, the candle lights up and the house happens and all the gifts happen. And like when Mirabel, like in the opening, she like says like, morning, abuelo. Like I know she refers to the portrait, but like I was like, what are you? She talks to the house is alive. So is Abuelo Pedro the house? Haunted. I know they call it a miracle. To me, that's called being haunted.
So, do you think Abuelo Pedro is ready to fucking die, and that's why the miracle is failing?
Yes, no, exactly. Because, like, outside of the historical context of Encanto makes no sense. Encanto makes no sense outside of itself and inside of itself. The plot makes no sense. The casita just starts cracking for no reason.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, watch this film. There's no reason why the casita starts cracking. It is a metaphor for their family, but it doesn't, like, there's no actual inciting incident, no actual thing that causes the casita to crack. So my reaction was like, it's just casita giving up. It just concerns me that Pedro might actually be in the house, and it might be, floors, drawers, doors. Pobrecito, like he's just kind of like opening things now.
He's just like performing party tricks for Mirabel, who's just sad.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, like Abuela talks to Pedro, and I know she doesn't talk to the house, but it's close.
The house listens. That much we definitely know.
And the house dies.
And the house dies.
And the house should have remained dead.
For the plot and for Pedro.
Yeah, both, please.
Yeah. Also, you say that no one's seen Monster House, but it received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature.
No way.
Lost to Happy Feet.
No way. What a cursed year.